Hey guys, Chris Peach here, and welcome to the Money Peach podcast. Hey, do you remember growing up learning how to handle money? Yeah, neither do I. So that's why we're here today, to make your money fun again. You know, we're going to talk about the principles in life that actually matter when it comes to managing your money in a way that works. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Money Peach podcast. Before we jump into another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast, I want to take a second to talk to you guys about my free budgeting form. You know, the first step to getting on any financial plan is to measure the money. And the only way to measure the money is if you are living on a monthly budget. So after this episode, head on over to moneypeach.com and please download my free budgeting form. There's thousands of people now all over the world who are taking back control of their money using this same form each and every month. The number one habit of highly successful people is they're proactive. So be proactive with your money and get yourself on a budget. Welcome back, everyone, to another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. I'm Chris Peach. This is episode 53. All right, I am super excited for today's episode. I'm bringing on Chris Hogan. Now, Chris Hogan works alongside Dave Ramsey. He's a Ramsey personality, and him and Dave travel all over the country, and they speak about money. They host the Smart Money Conference, and he talks about retirement. He also has a book called Retire Inspired. He has a podcast called Retire Inspired. And in fact, before today's show, the only connection I ever had with Chris Hogan was I went and attended one of their shows, and then afterwards, I waited for an hour to get that guy's autograph and to take a picture with him because I was overly impressed with how he talked about retirement. He talks about it much differently than I've ever heard before. So I wanted him to come on the show to not only talk to you guys about retirement, but also, how does Chris Hogan go from being Chris Hogan, the husband and the dad of 3 boys, to being Chris Hogan, the guy that stands next to Dave Ramsey on stage, writes books, and does podcasts? That's what I wanted to know. So without further ado, I'm going to say it. I'm bringing on my new friend from the Ramsey personality, Chris Hogan. Alrighty, guys, I am super excited for today's show. This has been in the works for the last over a month now, and I haven't really told anybody about it because I wanted to make sure it happened first, but we are here. We are doing it right today. We have Chris Hogan, financial expert and Ramsey personality from the Dave Ramsey team over in Nashville, Tennessee. He's here on the Money Peach podcast. We are going to throw a lot at you, a ton of value today. Super excited. So Chris Hogan, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, my friend. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, everybody listening just said, whoa, that's really his voice, because you have a very unique voice. You hear my voice, and it's like I tell my fans, I tell people, hey, I got a pretty manly voice, and then Chris Hogan comes on and just absolutely crushes it. So, but that's the proof right there. There's only one Chris Hogan voice. Would you agree with that? I
hope there's only one.
Before we get started, tell us a little bit about Chris Hogan. I mean, I think everybody out there, if you don't know who Chris Hogan is, then something's wrong with you. But with that said, let's tell us a little about Chris Hogan.
Well, I am a married father of 3 boys. They are 12, 11, and 10 years old. I am a former athlete and former banker. And so I've been dealing with this money stuff for almost, over 20 years now. And so I get a kick out of helping people have those aha moments when it comes to money, and then helping them understand a plan, the steps to take to make sure they get to financial independence.
Okay, so you said you've been doing this for over 20 years?
Yeah, I have been dealing with money in some shape or fashion for over 20 years.
Very cool. So let's just go back to the beginning then. Where did you grow up at?
I grew up in Kentucky, a small town called Versailles, right outside of Lexington.
Okay. And so I've read your book, Retired Inspired. We're definitely going to talk about that here in the show. But reading your book, you told a pretty cool story about playing football, being on a national championship team. Can you hit on that at all? Because I think that's really unique.
Sure. I tell you, it's one of the highlights of my life. Having an opportunity to play with teammates and to win our school's first national championship back in 1991. It was an incredible experience. From the coaches that we had to the teammates that I had, it's one of those things I'll never forget.
What position did you play?
I was a linebacker and defensive lineman.
So it's funny, if you look at a picture of you and you look at a picture of me, we both played linebacker. I played in high school. I didn't play in college level, obviously. And the reason why is I could not cut it. But so you played linebacker. We both played linebacker. Very cool. Defensive side of the ball. Defense wins ball games. So I got to throw that out there. And obviously, you guys won a national championship. You have the ring to prove it. So very cool. Okay, so where did you go to school then?
So I went to Georgetown College, a private Baptist school in Kentucky. And then from there, I went on to graduate school up in Pennsylvania. And so that's where I started coaching instead of playing. And then after that, I started into the banking world. So I took a dive in and started dealing with money right out of grad school.
Okay, so let's talk about that. When you say you dove into the banking world, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I did was I had always had this desire to be able to help people. That was the natural coach in me, being able to help people perform better. I wanted to be able to take kind of my athletic background and merge it with this business background. And I thought, if I can create the kind of team in business that we had in sports, that kind of camaraderie, that kind of focus, we can help a lot of people. And so that's where I started diving into really the money world, working in the consumer finance business. Now, here's the kicker, Chris. At that time, I would give out money at the beginning of the month, but guess what I got to do at the end of it? I had to go collect. I had to go knock on doors in Western Pennsylvania to collect with people that didn't make their payments. And I'm going to tell you something. It was very eye-opening. Because in the office, this was an account number. But when you go and you sit in someone's home and you're talking with them, you get to see them. You get to hear them. You get to understand what's going on in their world. And so that was kind of my first glimpse in understanding that this money thing impacts people regardless of income, regardless of race. And it's something that people were struggling with.
Chris, it's funny you say that you went beyond just that number. You said behind that number, there's a family, there's a person, there's a story. And so I was just reading about this company that they're a collection company, and they actually grew their business because they said, we're going to go from the idea of a collection is just, calling and harassing people, which you hear a lot of, to actually, no, we're going to find out exactly what's going on. How can we work with them? Can we get to know them on a personal level, which it sounds like you were doing as well, going door to door.
Yeah, it really was. It was eye-opening. I can't say that was my necessary intent. But my goal was to get out there and find out why they weren't calling us back or making a payment. I mean, in reality. But sitting down with people, I started to hear their story. And yeah, they're now not an account number. Now they're Bob and Mary, or they have a sick child, or John lost his job. And it was one of those things that really humanized things. And it really started to change the way that I looked at things and how I dealt with people.
So now, where did you meet your wife then? Because you said, you're married, you have kids. Was that in Pennsylvania, or did you meet her in school?
That was in college in Kentucky at Georgetown. So she too went there. She was a couple years younger than me, but that's where we met. And we actually met in debate class, which is hilarious. And we debated each other. Of course, she won. Of course. But that was the beginning of our friendship.
Okay. So the reason why I brought her up is you tell a pretty compelling story in your book, Retired Inspired, where you talk about how your wife actually, I don't want to give her all the credit because you had to work your butt off too, but she was the catalyst for your career.
She really was. After being in consumer finance, I moved on to Ohio, was an associate manager, took over a branch there, still in consumer finance. But when we moved to Tennessee, I moved into mainstream banking. Again, starting to see people, dealing with financial issues, making more money, but still the same problems like I saw back when I was in Pennsylvania. And so after a few years of this, she could start to see it was wearing on me. It was one of those on Sunday, I'd start to get frustrated and irritated about what I was going to have to go do on Monday. And we had heard of Dave. She had heard of him on the radio before I did. And so she told me about him. And so I was listening to him and I thought, you know what? This guy's making a lot of sense. So obviously hearing him and starting to plug into his messaging, it was impacting how I did my job as a banker. And it just got to this point where she said, you know what? You need to go meet Dave. And I was like, really? Okay, I'll just go down there and knock on the door and say hello.
Yeah, at the time, Dave, I think he still is. He might be even number 3 radio personality in the whole entire United States. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so, yeah, you're in Tennessee and your wife's saying, why don't you go down and just knock on the door? And so for those of you listening, I think just about everybody has at least heard of Dave Ramsey. He's on every city across the United States. But yeah, can you imagine your wife just telling you, why don't you just go down there and just talk to him? And you're thinking, really? So
yeah, that's exactly what I said. And I think I may have rolled my eyes or so along that path because she just made it sound so basic. And in my mind, it was a little bit bigger of a deal than she thought.
So Chris, I'm a big believer in there's things that happen for a reason in our lives. Sometimes we go through some painful situations in order to get further ahead in life. Sometimes things happen at the moment we can't explain, or we roll our eyes and think, what are you talking about? But then, maybe years, months, whatever it is later, we realize, oh, I understand why we had to go through that. Now, with that said, I want you to kind of take me through this silent auction that I read about.
Yes. So about, I want to say maybe 8 or 9 months after my wife mentioned me going to meet Dave, a friend of ours invited us to a silent auction. It was a benefit to be able to help families in need. And we were excited to go. And we went to the silent auction, sat at the table with a group of people, and you walk around and you bid on items. There were tickets there to NFL games. There were vacation packages and grills and books and all kinds of things. All of this to raise money. All of those items had been donated to raise money for this charity, this nonprofit. Lo and behold, we get there and we're walking around, and one of the items is called Dave's Chair. Now, what it was a couple of autographed books by Dave, but it was an opportunity to come sit in on the radio show with him, not be on the show, but be in there watching the show. Well, my wife sees this and lights up like a Christmas tree. She starts to stalk this item like a linebacker, literally, and you and I know what that means. She was focused to the point that she didn't really pay attention to other items. She would just stand there. And, at a silent auction, people come by and they write down a bid. And then, you move on. Well, as soon as someone would bid on that, my wife would outbid them. And this went on. So she stayed there. About an hour and a half later, the auction ends. She walks up to me holding this item and she goes, "Now go meet this man." And lo and behold, she had won the auction and I went to go meet Dave.
Wow, that's such a crazy story. I mean, I love hearing the story that 9 months earlier, she says, "Why don't you go drive down and talk to Dave?" And you're thinking, what are you talking about? And now you're at this silent auction. She wins it, right? She has to go and win it.
Yes.
Now you had no choice, right?
That's exactly right. I have no excuse. So after she wins it, I think I go a week or a couple weeks, and I call and set it up and come in to sit in on the show with Dave and get a chance to meet him. That was the beginning of all the difference. Being able to sit in and hear Dave on the radio, and I'd heard him on the radio before, but I hadn't got a chance to see all the things he was doing for people behind the scenes. I'll never forget a widow had called in. Her husband had just been killed in the military. He was serving abroad. And the compassion in Dave's voice, he's very authentic. But it was literally like sitting in on a two-person conversation, and I was just happening to overhear this, how he walked through the process. First, he tried to understand what she was going through by being empathetic and sympathetic. But then getting off air, all the things he did to put things in place to help this lady, it blew my mind. I was actually sitting there going, oh my gosh, this guy is not just giving advice. He cares. He cares about people on the other line. And it just kept happening, call after call. And I thought, you know what? This place is different. And it really was the beginning of an eye-opening experience for me.
I remember I went and heard you speak here in Phoenix. You and Dave came down and did the Smart Conference. It was just you and him. And you told this story about how, Dave Ramsey doesn't accept credit cards. And you told the story about how this lady came up really upset. She wanted to buy a book or buy something. And she was, yelling at him and saying, how dare you not take my credit cards? And I think along the lines of Dave told her, you know what? Why don't you just have it? I'd rather you have it than not have it at all. I remember you had said when you saw that, you were thinking, this guy's different. This guy's completely different.
Yeah. And again, that was another scenario, even after I joined the team, of just his heart. And literally, the look on her face, she was baffled. She came expecting a battle and she ended up getting a blessing, But again, just seeing these things time and time again really proved to me that this man is focused on helping as many people as possible. And I am fortunate and excited to be a part of it.
So, Chris, then what is the next step then? I mean, how do you go from sitting there and watching him, maybe shooting the breeze between commercial breaks to becoming part of the team? What was that like?
Well, it was an incredible experience, and it was one of those things that after sitting in with him, Dave called me a couple of days later, and we started meeting and having conversations. And at that time, I was banking and had an opportunity to kind of talk with him and get a heart for what he was trying to do. And so I ended up joining the team to work with pro athletes, entertainers, and musicians, higher end people, to really help them understand Dave's principles and plug those into their lives. And then moved on into coaching all types of people, not just pro athletes and entertainers. And so along those lines of me doing training sessions and speaking in front of people, it was just a natural fit for me in the speaking realm just to get up in front of people and just share this stuff that I had lived in my life. And so it was very natural and very fun. I enjoy the opportunity to see people have those aha moments as they deal with this and they start to believe that, hey, this stuff works if I work it.
Very, very cool. So now you're into the retirement. I feel like when I think of Chris Hogan now, what I think of you, when I think of, okay, Ramsey's team, but I think of you're the retirement expert. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is an area I really dug in on. And Chris, I'll tell you what happened. A gentleman came in. He was about 41, 42 years old. He was coming in for a coaching session with me and just wanted me to look over his investments and things of that nature and talk about some planning. Well, turns out this guy was retired at 41. I just remember looking at him. He had all his hair, all his teeth, right? He walked in by himself, and I just was baffled. And come to find out, he had worked essentially Dave's plan for all his life. His parents taught him, and he applied it. He stayed allergic to debt, and he invested. The guy never made over $55,000 a year, but here he was at age 41, reaching this pinnacle. And I thought, this is something. And so I dug into it, and I realized in my mind, I didn't think people could retire until 65. See, I had attached retirement with an age. And then it was this wake-up moment of looking at it and going, wait a minute, it has nothing to do with an age. It has nothing to do with Social Security. This has to do with having enough money. And that became essentially the catalyst to me beginning this dive in, because I was concerned if I was doing everything I needed to do for my family. You know, did I dot all the I's and cross all the T's? And so me knowing money and understanding how it works and living it, but I had questions, and I wanted to make sure I did everything that I could to ensure that my family would be in a good position for later.
You know, Chris, in the book Retired Inspired, when I was reading through it, something really stuck out to me about how you say retirement isn't an age, it's a number. And I think the reason why so many of us have the age in our mind is, for me, it goes back to pensions. I am a firefighter, and so we are still inside the pension system. We have additional stuff that we can supplement on our own, but we're inside the pension system, and pension is an age for us. It's really, you know, years of service, which takes us to that age. So we always are thinking, you know, to get to our 20-year, 25th year. That's the mindset, because there's no other way to look at it. But if you look broad, pensions are going away. So one of the things I liked about your book is you gave me a couple of facts that I, as somebody who has a pension, did not know these existed. And one of them was talking about where the pension originated. And I thought this was really neat.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening for me, too, as I started to dig into it. And it turned out that Guinness, the beer company over in Ireland, they created the first pension plan around 1860. It amazed me. And it was one of those things that not only how they did it, but the heart behind it. You see, their goal was not only to provide money, they put money away for their employees, but not only the people there that were working, but they would also pay for people that had retired, or even if they'd passed away, they would give money to the families. And I thought it was really eye-opening to see a company caring about their teammates, even way back then.
And then so we talk about that was the pension, like the first one in the world. And then the one that was really ironic is, because I have the same feelings that probably you and Dave do about American Express, but tell me about the United States pension.
Yeah. Ironically enough, the very first one here in the States was established by American Express. Yes, the credit card company, which is baffling to think, you know, that at that time they had the presence of mind to care about their people. But now it's the same company that are putting people in debt and putting people in a position where they may not be able to retire.
I couldn't agree with you more. And then something else that you wrote in your book that really stood out to me is I hear people ask all the time, why does Social Security no longer work? What's going on? Why is it failing? Why doesn't it work? And you break that down perfectly in your book. And if you could just summarize what you had said about why Social Security, because I think so many people just don't know this.
Yeah, well, actually, Social Security, it happened in 1935. And obviously, we all know we were coming out of the Great Depression at that time, but it was an opportunity to be able to help people. Now, the crazy thing is that, you know, you couldn't draw it at that time initially until you were about 65. That's when you could get your first payment. But it was a way to help people to make sure that they were able to have some money to be able to live. Now, it was to help people. It wasn't supposed to be the end-all, be-all for things. And so essentially what we've done is looked at this thing that's supposed to be a helpful thing to now we're looking at it where it's a complete thing in this day and age, where people are thinking that this is the only thing that I have. And if people don't invest or take the right steps to put themselves in a position, that's true. Like on average, the average Social Security payout's around $16,000 a year, which equates to around $1,333 a month. And when you start to look at that and think about people having to pay rent or mortgages or their car payments or credit cards, you can start to see that that money is not going to go very far. And so for me, diving into this and starting to research it, it started to open my own eyes. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to make sure that I'm doing what I can for myself and not rely on the government to save me.
You know, one of the things you had written in your book was earlier, people weren't living as long, so the government wasn't on the hook, if you will, to pay out Social Security for as long as they are today. One of the quotes I found in your book here says, in 1960, there were 5.1 workers for each person getting Social Security. So basically 5.1 people were working for every one person who was receiving Social Security. And so that is now dropped to 2.8. And by 2040, they're saying only 2 people are going to be putting in for Social Security. That right there was eye-opening. You're exactly right. I mean, as we get older, as the technology increases, better medications, we start living longer. Either they're going to have to move the retirement date way later because now the government's on the hook for paying us a lot longer on that Social Security benefit.
Yeah, it really is. And you start to think about that. And if you think back into the, 1935 and 1940, the average lifespan, and then you look at it now where people are living to be 85, 90 years old, it was another thing that kind of was another wake-up call for me because I thought, my goodness, retirement's not a 5 or 10-year thing. If you do it right, it could be a 20 to 30-year thing. And so all the more reason, the more money I put in, the more I give myself a chance to live on later in life. And so for me, it was really, I was excited, I was encouraged, but then I was also fearful from the people that I had coached and talked with. So many people thought Social Security was going to save the day. So many people thought the government, there was going to be a magic fairy just to show up and take care of them. And meeting some of these people and talking with them, I've heard some heartbreaking stories. Chris, I've had people tell me time and time again, I wish I would have known this sooner. I heard that so much, it became kind of my mantra that I wanted to make sure that I was helping people hear about this sooner as opposed to later. I didn't want to meet any more 60-year-old people or 70-year-old people with that look of regret in their eyes, almost wishing they would have talked with me sooner or heard this information sooner. And so that's really what got me started on the path that eventually led to the book. I wanted to empower people and give them the information so they could make choices for themselves and not have the government make choices for them.
Absolutely. So the last thing I want to talk about as far as this kind of the background, the history of retirement is another thing that was shocking me is I'm 34 years old. 401ks have just always been in my life. I don't remember there not being 401ks, but reading your book, you talk about how, there's a very large population out there that are actually older than 401ks. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. See, as the pensions, as we define this for your audience, this is where companies put aside money for you. You didn't have to worry with it. All you had to do was show up, do your job, and they would take care of it for you. Well, lo and behold, you started to see this pendulum shift and change kind of in the 70s, where now companies started to realize, my goodness, people are working longer, living longer. We don't know if we can afford to do this. Thus began the 401k, the option for people to be able to save for themselves. And just for your listeners to understand, I know 401ks and 403bs sound like these, military terms, but all it means, if you go to section 401 item K in the IRS code, all it means is companies can provide a retirement savings plan for their employees. And so thus began the onus, the shift from now, instead of companies putting money aside for you, now you had to do it for yourself. And the 401k gave an option for people to be able to do that on a pre-tax side, which meant if you were putting money in there, you would pay taxes on the money later when you drew it out at age 59 and a half.
Absolutely. So we talked about the 401k side, then let's talk about the Roth side. What's the difference between a Roth and a 401k?
Oh, Chris, whenever I hear the word Roth, I get tingly, buddy. I'm going to tell you something. It's a beautiful thing. What it is it's an opportunity for us to use post-tax dollars. That means after money hits into your bank account, gives us an opportunity to invest this money, and it's all going to grow tax-free because we'll never have to pay taxes on it. All of it's growing. And so it's an opportunity for people to put aside more money for their financial future. Now, I want to make your listeners also aware, some companies out there also offer what's called a Roth 401k, which is an opportunity. Instead of you using a traditional 401k with pre-tax dollars, you have an opportunity to use a Roth 401k, which is after-tax dollars. And remember, Roth means tax-free. So it gives you a greater opportunity to put more money aside without having to pay taxes later.
So if you're listening to this and you have a company, I would encourage you to call your HR, find out if you have a Roth 401k. I'm a huge fan of them as well. And so a lot of the questions I get, Chris, are where does the match go? So if my company offers a match into a Roth 401k, how does that work?
Okay. So the Roth is obviously, that's tax-free dollars. So that's money you don't have to pay taxes on, the growth. However, with the match, what this means is companies, they're not doing a pension, but they're willing to match you up to a certain percent for money you put aside. So if your company offers a 401k, the Roth 401k, the money you put aside into it is going to grow tax-free. However, the nuance is because the company is matching you that money, the match part, you will have to pay taxes on later. But that's okay. The goal is to make sure you've got more money going in than you have coming out for later in life.
And keep in mind, a match is free money. I mean, it
is correct.
It is free money, and free money is always good. What would life feel like if you no longer had to worry about money? What would life look like with $10,000 in the bank and zero debt? Do you realize you're really only a few decisions away from living life on your terms and not the bank's? How do I know this? Well, because we were once living paycheck to paycheck, completely broke and facing a mountain of debt. However, fast forward to today, we're debt-free, we're building wealth, and we live life on our terms, not the bank's. So now it's your turn. I would love for you to join me on my free workshop where I share the same step-by-step system we use to take back our life and our money once and for all. So head on over to moneypeach.com/workshop and grab your free spot in this online training that you're going to absolutely love. Once again, that's moneypeach.com/workshop. All right, Chris, we're talking about Retire and Inspire. Now I want to get more kind of nitty gritty into the book. So if we can, let's break down the RIQ, because I think this is wonderful, absolutely amazing. When I first heard about it, I'm like, okay, it's catchy, RIQ, but then when I dove into it, I'm like, this is really cool. And this is what everybody needs.
Yeah. As I was coaching people, years ago, everyone would ask me, okay, Hogan, how much am I going to need to live on in retirement? And so going through a series of questions, I could sit down with them and, in about an hour and 15 minutes, I could arrive at a ballpark number to help them understand this is what you're going to need to have, whether it's through your 401k, 403b, which all a 403b is for a nonprofit organization, churches, hospitals, school teachers, things of that nature. That's their version of the 401k. And so I'd walk through that algorithm with them and help them see that. Well, as I was starting to research the book, I thought, you know what? If I could help more people understand, number one, retirement's not an age, it's a financial number. Number two, help them start to gain an idea of how much are they going to need to live their dreams. And so it was really one of those things where talking to developers, having conversations with Dave, really walking through, and I wanted a quick tool that allows people to do that. And so the RIQ, which stands for Retire Inspired Quotient, is a free tool at my website, chrishogan360.com, that allows you to plug in a few data points, how much you want to live on per month in retirement, and how many years you plan to retire, and how much you currently have saved for retirement. Plugging those three things in will help you to see what is my big number? What's the dollar amount that I need to have saved? And that's what the RIQ does. Now, we took it a step further because I wanted people to understand the opportunity of things. And so not only will it show you your big number, but if you are running behind, it'll show you how much you need to be investing now to make sure that you get to that number in the number of years you say you want to retire.
So my wife and I were on the website actually last night, and we were plugging in our information, and it asked us about, what are our goals, which I like that. It was, a goal is not a wish, right? A wish is just like, I think I want to do this, but a goal is, no, let's put some action to it. So what are your goals for us? So one of the things we looked at is one of the things that was important to us is traveling. And so we set our travel budget, we put in our information, and I really liked how it took care of all the inflation for you. So you don't have to worry about what's my money going to be worth. And it came back and gave us a number. And we were excited because we looked at that number, we looked at what we're saving now, and we're on that track. We're on the right path. But I think a lot of people, Chris, they're going to punch it in, and I hope this happens. It needs to be a wake-up call, right? Because the cavalry, like you guys say on your show, is not coming to save you. And this is going to be a wake-up call. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. And that was really the goal. You see, I think it's impossible to manage anything you're not aware of. And so having heard people tell me they wish they would have known or they wish they would have heard this sooner, for me, it was an opportunity. I wanted to help people see it, identify it, and know the goal. Because you're right. A dream without a plan is called a wish. And so I start off the RIQ talking to people about their dreams, getting them to think, what is it you want to do? You know, we all have dreams down inside of us. We have things we wish we could do and things we plan to do. But I figured if I could get people to tap into that and understand, hey, I want to travel or I want to start a dream business later in life or do mission trips, whatever that is, it reminds people of why they need to save and what they're working toward. And I think our dreams motivate us much more than fear scares us. And so I wanted to get more people motivated, but also enlightened to see what it is I'm working toward and why does it matter so much.
Yeah, I think it's important to look ahead and think about where you want to be. But, you know, for me, Chris, in my own life, pain's a great motivator. I think sometimes you look at your situation and you start to realize if I don't make some changes, there's not going to be a dream for me. And you touched on this in your book. And if you wouldn't mind talking about it, it was super powerful for me. I read it over to my wife. Andrea read it over too. And like our breath was taken away by it. And it's the story you talk about the young couple that comes in and they're not really paying attention. And they call you back up and they say, Chris, we need to meet immediately.
Yeah,
do you remember that?
I do. I'll never forget Michael and Donna. And essentially they had, as you said, had come in and wanted to meet. And, you know, I sat down with them to coach them and they're not paying attention at all. They're doodling and playing on their phones and all this. And I let it go on for about 30 minutes. And I realized they're just not ready. And that's one of the things as a coach and a financial counselor, I understand that you can't make people do something. You have to meet them when they're ready. And so we wrap up the session. I thank them and they go on. And it was literally a couple of weeks after that, I get a phone call from Michael, who's a former football player. And he's left me a message essentially begging me to come back in. And it just sounded weird. You know, I had just met with them and they weren't paying attention. And so I agreed to meet with them for another 30 minutes tops. And they come in this time and they're very focused. I mean, they're writing down everything that I say. They won't blink. They're so zeroed in. And it was such a difference between the first meeting that I thought they were pranking me. I thought they were messing with me. And so I stopped the session. I said, all right, guys, what is going on? I said, the first session you weren't focused at all, and now I can't get you to blink. And they kind of looked at me and they were like, oh, no, we had a wake-up call. Essentially, the short side of this is one of his favorite aunts was living across town, and she called him and asked Michael if he'd come cut her grass because the guy that normally cut it, she couldn't get in touch with him, and the grass was getting up pretty high. Michael was glad to do it, and he went over to cut her grass, and he's out there cutting it, but he forgot his lunch. And so he thought he would just go in and grab something quick at her house so he could get his yard cut and then go get her yard cut and go over and finish his before the heat of the day. And as he told me this, he started to get more and more quiet. His wife, Donna, would not look at me. You could tell this big guy, he was tearing up. And so he said he went in to get something to eat, and he said he couldn't find much. There wasn't much in the refrigerator, and the right cabinet was empty, but in the left cabinet, he opened it up, and the only thing in there was 7 cans of dog food. He got real quiet, and he looked at me, and I'm thinking, okay, there's dog food, you know. And then he told me something I will never, ever unhear. He said, Chris, she doesn't have a dog. And I'll never forget sitting there looking at him, and I'm processing this. Why does she have 7 cans of dog food if she doesn't have a dog? And I'm just looking at him, and he's looking at me in a way, Chris, as if he's begging me to get it so he doesn't have to say it. When it finally connected, and I realized why this man was looking at me the way he was, it literally was like a sledgehammer to my chest. She doesn't have a dog, which meant the 7 cans of dog food is what his aunt was eating. This was her retirement reality. I'll never forget walking through that with them. That was the thing for him. It was this wake up that not only did they need to get serious, but they needed to help themselves so they could help their aunt. It was just one of those stories that motivated me because I didn't know, and my brain was processing how many people are in this situation. How many people are living like that because they don't have a choice? How many people are going to be living like that because of their choices? And so it just kind of was another motivator for me to get this message out, to get people to wake up, just to look at this and understand how important it is for us to take the steps that we can while we can.
It's so important. I'm so glad you were willing to share that story, because those of you listening right now on the other end, you're hearing this story, and this is a reality for someone. This is somebody's reality. Somebody's aunt out there, doesn't tell anybody what's going on, and she's eating dog food because she did not have money put away for retirement, and Social Security just isn't going to cut it. It's below the poverty line. And so Chris, when he shares that story in his book, it was a sledgehammer to my chest too. And I read it. I couldn't even believe it. And hearing Chris's voice, the passion behind it, you can sense that this stuff is important. This stuff matters. And that's why we're going to go in a little bit further. So the thing I hear all the time, Chris, on a regular basis is the stock market is just not safe. You can't invest in retirement funds anymore. They're just not safe. Everybody's out to get everybody. And so people, especially younger generation, the millennials that I talk to, they're almost afraid to invest. You got to think of millennials came out right around the 2007-8. Everything was crashing. You see in the media that the world's ending. So what's the problem here? What is the issue we're having with this whole mystery about the market is now unsafe, we can't invest?
Yeah, I think it's really more of a lack of understanding. We're quick as a society to pull one or two instances and really try to call that the norm. And that's dangerous. It's a matter of really understanding how the market works. And I travel all around the country and I explain to people, the stock market is like the supermarket. If you go into a supermarket, there are all kinds of things that you can buy. There are things that are good for you. There are things that are not so good for you. The stock market is the same way. There are things that you can invest in that are good for you. There are things that are not so good for you. And so helping people to see this, even in the book, Retire Inspired, I talk about investing like riding a roller coaster. I'm married to a thrill seeker. So my wife not only wants to ride the roller coaster, she wants to sit up front, and I prefer to be in the middle so I can see what's going on, right? But the deal is this: if you wear your safety belt, the deal is the roller coaster is going to go up and down. It's going to have some turns and all this, but you arrive back safely, right, when you're wearing your safety belt. And I think when people understand the stock market, they understand what it is they're investing in, and they invest in the right kinds of things, that they can grow their money. There are two things it takes to grow money. You need time and compound interest. And those are your two financial best friends when you're working the right kind of plan.
So I had recently, Chris, on the podcast, he's been on the Dave Ramsey show too, Tom Corley from Rich Habits. And so one of the things Tom talks about is how the most successful, wealthiest people in the world, or the people that he's interviewed, they understand the value of time. Time meaning we live in a society where everything is so instant, right? Everything's on demand. We don't really watch commercials anymore. Everything is in our face whenever we want it right now. But you can't apply that to retirement, can you?
No, you really can't. It's really one of those things where you've got to get the right kinds of ingredients and get started. I tell people, listen, I don't care what happened yesterday. I'm worried about what's going on today and for tomorrow. And so you're never too young to get started. Never too young to get started with a 401k, but you're also never too old to get started either. And I've talked to people who are in their 60s or 50s, and they feel like it's too late for them. And albeit they may not be able to travel the world for 6 months out of the year if they're just getting started in their 50s, but it doesn't mean you can't take some trips. It doesn't mean you can't still retire with some dignity. But let's not let another day slip past us. Let's make sure we maximize the time that we have.
Yeah, it's always better to start as early as possible, but the best time to start is now.
Yes, absolutely.
One of the things you talk about in the book, Retire Inspired, that stuck out to me, because I love visualizations. I was a wrestler, a football player. I needed sometimes a knock on the head. I need visualizations. I like picture books, right? So I'm reading your book, and you talk about this bamboo tree comparison, and it stuck out to me. And I think if you could repeat that or just kind of mention that, a lot of people can visualize that as well.
Sure. I was looking at it and I was trying to figure out an illustration to help people understand how compound interest works. And I stumbled upon the story of the bamboo tree. This is essentially a tree where you plant it, and literally for the first 2 or 3 years, you can't see anything happening, right? And we're in this microwave society these days where we have something called minute rice, right? We want stuff fast. But the crazy thing about the bamboo is this, that once it's planted and you got to fertilize it and water it and take care of it, but literally once it breaks the ground, it literally grows at such a rate that if you hold still, you can actually see it growing. Now, I know people are going to laugh at me and think I'm crazy, but I want you to just Google it, look for this, and watch. And literally, the growth rate happens so fast that it's just continually going. And that is essentially how compound interest works. That not only when the money you invest, when you invest it properly, not only does that money make money called interest, but now your interest starts to make interest. And that's the beauty of growing your money. I talk about in the book. You want to be a money gardener. You want to grow as much money because what are we trying to do, Chris? Essentially with retirement, we're trying to put enough funds away that we're able to replace our paycheck. That gives us that ability to be free, to go do the things that we want to do later in life. But we have to create those streams of income. Your 401k is a stream. Your IRAs are a stream. Your pension, if you're lucky enough to have one, is a stream. And then there's also a little bitty stream called Social Security. And so getting people to think of those income streams and income check replacement, that helps them start to connect more pieces of the puzzle.
When I was reading that, it made me think of, I have a friend named Alan. He's a firefighter. And so he's been a firefighter, Chris, for about, I would say, 10 to 12 years, right in that range there. And so we have, for the fire department, we have what's called a 457, which is kind of like a 401k, right? But more for government employees. It's a little bit different, but it goes in pre-tax, gross tax-free. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to him just recently, and he goes, hey, check this out. And he shows me his statement. And he has $250,000 in his 457. And I'll tell you, a firefighter, I think he probably makes right around $60,000 a year. And I said, Alan, you make $60,000 a year, and you have $250,000 in there. And the reason why, as we looked at it, the reason why is this. He started off maxing it out from day one. And so maxing it out every single year, he started off at $15,500 and just kind of creeped up as it inflated. But the last probably 2 years, he's had a good chunk of money in there, and he's done really well. The markets have been up. And it kind of goes back to, that bamboo thing where in the very beginning, he wasn't seeing returns, right? Very, very, very minimal. And now 10 to 12 years later, he has a good chunk of money in there. And when he's getting an 18% return because the markets have been up, he's having a lot more money compounding for him. And when I was reading your story in the book, I'm like, this is exactly what happened to Alan. Really, really cool story.
No, it really is. And it really helps people understand and start to see it. And so that's why I encourage people, as you're putting money away in your 401k or your 403b or even your 457, the key is to leave that money there. So many people have told me they started a 401k and they pulled money out for a wedding or a home down payment. And that really, it just breaks my heart because I tell them, you're stopping the growth. That's like going out and planting a bush, letting it grow for 2 or 3 years, then going out and ripping it up by the root. You're stopping the growth of that money whenever you pull money out. And so that's why we encourage people to have an emergency fund as you're starting to work through the 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside. So when life does happen, you have money to pull from so you don't have to pull from your dreams.
Chris, the next thing I want to ask you is I had somebody ask me the other day, long story short, they're getting a big chunk of money. And they said, I didn't invest at all this year because I knew I was going to get this chunk of money. I'm going to throw it all in the market. But then I was told I should be doing dollar cost averaging. And I said, well, what do you think? And they go, I don't even know what dollar cost averaging means. And I thought, this is a question I want to ask Chris. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. Well, dollar cost averaging is essentially where you're investing a set dollar amount over a period of time. And what that does is it allows you, regardless of what the market is doing, you know that you are consistently investing. And what that means is, obviously, with the stock market, prices can fluctuate up and down, but your consistency over time essentially means that because you are doing that over time and you are buying, you're going to be getting things at various prices, but it's going to give you the best overall plan because of the habit of simply saving intentionally and then leaving the money there.
Okay, that makes sense. I had somebody the other day, they were 22 years old, and they said, I don't know anything about investing. I'm saving money. I just don't know where to put it. Without giving, in-depth financial coaching advice, what's something that I could share with them or you could share with them? Like if you're 20 years old or 23 years old and you just want to get started, where's a good spot for them to get started?
Well, first and foremost, I would tell any 22-year-old that's out there thinking as either a direct result of parents that have taught them or information they're plugging into. So give them a fist bump for me. That is fantastic. At 22 years old, I would advise them, obviously, to get plugged into a 401k or a 403b. That is a great opportunity because it happens automatically through your employer, which it kind of removes the human factor. I've had somebody tell me, well, I'm not going to do a 401k. I'll just write a check each and every month. And I laugh because I thought, you know what? You might do that for 4 or 5 months. But then again, you're either A, going to forget or something's going to happen and you're going to stop. So automating that 401k and 403b would be the absolute first step that I would advise a 22-year-old to do.
What if they work a job where they don't have an employer? Like say they're a nanny. Our nanny asks us all the time, like, I should be saving money. Where should I be putting the money? And I try to give her the best advice, but now I want to hear what you would say, and then I might retract my statement. So what would you say? What would you say to that?
I would tell that individual, if they don't have access to a 401k or 403b, to definitely utilize the Roth IRA. The Roth IRA allows you to put up to $5,500 away per year. If you're over the age of 50, there's an extra $1,000 catch up, so you can go up to $6,500. But again, because the word Roth and it's tax free, that's a great place to start. Now, if someone says, okay, well, Chris, I can do the $5,500 and I've still got other money that I want to invest, I would encourage them to get connected with an investment professional and take a look at mutual funds. Mutual funds are a great opportunity to get someone plugged into the market without taking the unnecessary risk of single stocks.
Chris, I also have a financial advisor that we sit down with twice a year, knee to knee, or whenever we need to get on the phone. Like I like that term, knee to knee, like you say. It makes it feel like you're sitting down with a real person, which is important. But we're in this day and age now where I feel like people, what they're reading, what they're seeing is they're saying, oh, you should never have a financial advisor. You should only do robo investing. And then you have another group saying, no, you don't want to do robo investing. You only want to have a financial advisor. When somebody asks these questions to you, what is your response to that?
Well, when I hear that, I liken it, and I think it really goes based on the individual. I can tell you, if I have a toothache, I'm not pulling my own tooth. Okay, I'm going to go talk to a dentist. I want to talk to a professional because I need to know not only what's going on with the tooth, but why did it happen? And can other issues be going on with other teeth in my mouth? That's just me. I want a professional's guidance just because I want to understand what it is that I'm doing. And I'll tell you this, Chris, we all feel this way, especially whenever we have car issues. Like if your car is acting up, we tend to ignore the light for a little while, right? But if it starts to run weird or it won't start, suddenly we have our attention. When that happens, because we need this vehicle to get back and forth to work, we want to talk to someone that can help us fix it. Now, if I'm going to take time to go see a professional for my tooth and for my car, you better believe I'm going to go talk to someone about my dreams, because those are things that matter to me. And so I would encourage people just to find a professional with this, though. This is the one caveat. As you talk to a professional, I want you to find someone that has what I call the heart of a teacher. The heart of a teacher means that this is an individual that's wanting to help you. They're not trying to just sell you some stuff and get you to do something. They actually hear your goals and they want to help you reach your goals. And it's a big difference. It's like doing business with someone that has integrity versus doing business with someone without. And we've all dealt with both. And we know when you deal with someone that has integrity and has the heart of a teacher, it feels better all the way around.
Our financial advisor, we actually found through Dave Ramsey. And so I remember our first meeting, we sat down with them, and I didn't know a lot about how to invest. I knew I wanted to save. We just got out of debt. And so we sat down and he, showed us how everything works, kind of, showed us how their program works. And so I said, hey, his name's Brent. I said, Brent, I'm ready to get going today. And he says, well, if you're a fan of Dave, you know that we don't make financial decisions this big on the spot. I would like you to go home and sleep on it and call me tomorrow. And I'm looking at him going, but do you realize that you have an opportunity to close me right here, and you're telling me to go home and sleep on it? And I remember driving home, and my wife was like, I got a good feeling about him. And I had a good feeling right away, but she was the one that needed to have a good feeling. It was because, like you said, it was the heart of a teacher. I wasn't being sold anything. I mean, he could have sold me right there. It was, no, call me back tomorrow. I want you to sleep on this financial decision, which I thought was really important.
I like that. And again, it doesn't surprise me because the SmartVestor Pros, those are the investment professionals that Dave and I have trained and we work with all across the country. They have that kind of heart. And twofold. Number one, I love that you and your wife being on the same page as a team, feeling good about it means that you guys are going to get the right kind of guidance. You're going to be moving in the right kind of direction. And it gives us this confirmation inside of ourselves that we're doing what we can do to help people. And so if you've got listeners out there that maybe they've got a 401k that they want to get reviewed and see if they're investing in the right things, or they've never done it before and they're not sure how to go about it, I have a group of people ready to help you. They're called SmartVestor Pros. You can go to my website, chrishogan360.com, and click on the Dream Team button. You can plug in your zip code and find out if you have a SmartVestor Pro in your area and call them up, interview them. See if, ask them some questions and see if they're a good fit for you, because we need the right people to guide us to our desired destinations.
Yeah, I would highly encourage anybody listening to do that. Andrea and I did this back in 2011, and when we have a personal relationship with our own advisor, where I don't feel like I'm calling a company. I feel like I'm calling Brent, and he knows exactly. He knows our family, he knows our kids, he knows our goals. He's helped us with our what we call our dream planning. And I highly, highly suggest you do that. We're going to put links in all the show notes to what Chris talked about. So if you're driving, you don't have a pen and paper, don't worry. All the links will be there. So Chris, tell us more about where we can find Retire Inspired, where we can find out more about you, your podcast. Let us know.
Yes. Well, it's great you mentioned that. I actually do a podcast where I talk about kind of these topics as it relates to retirement, but also more on the life side of things, helping people get motivated and move forward, chasing down progress. But they can find all things related to me at my website. It's chrishogan360.com. That's chrishogan360.com.
All right, so you heard it, guys. chrishogan360.com. We'll have links to the show notes. All right, I have a couple rapid-fire questions for you, Chris. I didn't tell your assistant I was going to do this, so I wanted to kind of make sure you weren't ready for it, because I like these. They're fun. So,
all right.
The first thing I want to ask you is, let me know about what book do you recommend to everybody? I know it's your book, but outside of Retire Inspired, what book is it that you're saying, this book's changed my life, I want everybody to read this? Do you have one of those in your mind?
Yeah, actually I do. It's called The Go-Getter. The Go-Getter, it's a small, quick read, but it literally talks about how if we want something, we've got to have this mentality where we're not only willing to chase it down, but we're willing to sacrifice what it is that our heart truly desires. And it just really reminds me of just how much we can accomplish with the right attitude, the right tools, and the right motivation.
I love that you said that. That's one of my favorite books too. And I like to gift it because when you're on a budget, it's a very affordable book to gift because it's
yes, it is.
Small. All right. I love that book. Okay. Next thing is, what is the picture on your home screen of your phone?
Oh, it is of my three boys. Tyson is my oldest son, Brock is my middle one, and Case is the little guy. Those three boys are my motivation. My desire is to put them in a better position financially so one day I can impact my grandkids' kids down the road. And so that's one of those things that it just stays first and foremost in my mind.
I love it. All right. And this is just because we have pictures of you on our site now. We're going to have pictures of you in the show notes. You're a defensive linebacker. I got to know, this is just for me, Chris. What were you bench pressing in college? That's just
You know what? It has been so long ago, I have no idea. But I would tell you this. It was over 365.
And back then, there was no wrapping elbows. This is all natural stuff. This is where you're just you're pushing up some iron.
We had a great strength coach. We had a lot of fun, man. I tell you, that teamwork, the ability to work together as a group. But I tell people out there that are married, imagine what can happen inside your home if you and your spouse get on the same page and you start to look at each other like a team. Instead of just these allies, you actually become a team. And at home, we don't wear the same hats or the same jerseys. We just have the same last names. But the incredible things we can accomplish when we get on the same page and we understand what it is we're chasing.
I love it. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, definitely by far the biggest guest we have ever had. Very special moment for me because when I heard that we were going to have Chris Hogan on the show, I mean, it was, my breath went away for a second and the clouds opened up and the heavens shined down, and then here you are. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Really loved having you.
Hey, Chris, thank you for having me, my friend. And the next time I'm in Arizona, we got to catch up.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, my friend.
And just like that, we wrap up another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. All the links, anything that Chris Hogan and I talked about can be found over the show notes. Head over to moneypeach.com/session53. That's moneypeach.com/session53. Special thanks goes out to my producer, Steve Stewart, my assistant, Kayla Sloan. Without them, this show would not be possible. We'll see you guys next week, same time, same place, with another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. Boom,